So it's a real pleasure to be here. I have to compliment Professor Christo for the presentation and for a clear demonstration of what can one country do in research when they are functioning like a well-oiled machinery. And it's excellent because we are one presentation after another, because we can just see the comparison like black and white, just like my first slide. So, we have to be objective. We have to detect the problems, be honest, and in order to tackle them more efficiently. To say that tick-borne diseases are overlooked in North Macedonia is an overstatement. Is way worse than that. So we have almost no data on tick species, no data on tick-borne pathogens or tick-borne diseases. So to tackle an infectious disease, the first infectious disease specialists, the ones with the mask, when they were dealing with the plague, the three developed from those into infectious disease specialists, epidemiologists, and microbiologists. But we fail at every level regarding tick-borne diseases in our country. So these are some of the research in our country. Not some, this is everything. So we can see regarding tick fauna, we have only 3 studies, and they are for one region, and they are usually from our colleagues in veterinary medicine. But we have almost slight picture what is circulating, which species are circulating in our country. So we can expect maybe something, but still no. When we are dealing with a patient with fever and rash, almost no one thinks about a tick-borne disease. And another example is here I have listed all the studies involving tick pathogens in North Macedonia. As you can see, there are only 2. One about Ehrlichia canis, again, from our colleagues in the veterinary medicine, and one about CCHF virus in 2015 that showed the circulating of this virus, that gave evidence for circulating of this virus. And again, our colleagues from veterinary medicine. No studies from clinicians, epidemiologists, and no studies on human individuals. What does our experience show us? So, as I said, we checked the medical history in the clinic, for example, for the last 7 years to see if there are any cases treated for Lyme borreliosis in the country. And we haven't found a single one. So this can mean, yes, there is no Lyme borreliosis in Macedonia, or this can mean that this disease is overlooked. Additionally, every year we have patients with fever and rash after a tick bite, because things are not enough complicated. As the Professor Christo said, almost 2/3, not 2/3, 1/3 or half of the patients don't know even that they have been bitten by a tick. So the diagnosis is furthermore complicated. We know that Mediterranean spotted fever is well researched, well described in Bulgaria, in Greece. So some of us think that we have Mediterranean spotted fever in North Macedonia. So it was the first thing we expected to find when we shifted our focus on tick-borne diseases. And additionally, all the patients with meningoencephalitis in the country are treated at our clinic. But every year we discharge patients with meningoencephalitis of unknown etiology. We have a viral panel, a bacterial panel, and that's it. We even have West Nile, but we don't test for West Nile. So there's one thing, common misconception in the country, which is spread through the medical professionals, and it's just an example of what do clinicians know about tick bites and tick-borne diseases. Just an example of how much it is overlooked, and because every patient that when I started my research on these diseases, every patient that comes to me to check him when he usually develops symptoms, he comes to me and he already received a shot for tetanus, because everybody thinks that ticks transmit tetanus. And we took the One Health approach. So it's a multi-layered approach. We don't have most of this in our country, so we, through our connections with Alejandro in France, Pavle from the Pasteur Institute, we managed to start laying the foundations. There were many problems. Some would think that the biggest problem would be in building the international connections, but the biggest problem is because when patients come to our clinic to consult for a tick infestation, they usually have been to the emergency department where the tick was extracted, and the tick is then thrown in a can. So we had to speak separately to all the emergency departments several times, be persistent, be aggressive for them when they send the patient for consultation at our clinic, to send the tick to, so we can analyze it and see what is it. And we had to describe that tick species, tick identification is important, but baby steps. So, as I said, we figured that because we saw at our clinic, our experience showed us that we have spotted fever almost every year after a tick bite. So when we sat down and started our plans for research, we said, okay, we must find that Rickettsia connori, that will be the easiest part, and we will do a case report. The first case report, it would be the easiest, it will be Rickettsia connori. So this patient came at the summer of 2022, last year. And the patient had a regional rash, didn't have diffuse generalized rash, had a erythematous circumscriptive plaque around the tick bite. She saw the tick was extracted again at the emergency department. She was started on amoxicillin and clavulanic acid, didn't improve, they sent her to us. But this lady was very cool. She took a picture before the tick was extracted, so we were able to identify it as hyaloma. This was interesting because we proved that hyaloma in Skopje, in the capital, is here, and as we know, it can transmit. He's the best one at transmitting CCHF. Usually, we treat these patients. We give them doxycycline, they get better, they go home. We don't do even serology. We don't have serology testing. Why don't we have serology testing? Because we don't think about rickettsiosis. Patient is better and we don't care. But now we are doing research. So we took blood samples. We took capillary blood from the point of tick infestation, and we found that it's not Rickettsia sibirica, it's not Rickettsia conori, it's Rickettsia sibirica, Mongoli timone. So this is a rare pathogen. It allowed us to publish in Eurosurveillance, yes, but the most important part, the most important conclusion from this is that we really don't know what we have in the country. So this inspired us to continue and have even more aggressive approach. This was the first thing when we started talking about tick research. This was the first study we tried to do. So we took tick-infested humans, we analyzed the tick, we analyzed the blood. We see which species, with this study we figured we can start acting on many problems at once. So we can see which ticks are here, which ticks are involved in human infestation, what do they carry, so what are the Macedonian population exposed to when bitten by a tick. But as you can see, from 386, almost 400 consultations in 2023 at my clinic for tick infestation, we managed to gather only 17 patients. That's because of the problem I was talking about earlier. No communication or weak communication, low awareness between the medical professionals. But it didn't discourage us, because I will show you what we did in 2023. From the 17 patients, although a small sample size, no patient had any clinical manifestations. As expected, Ixodes ricinus was dominant in the tick species, and not expected, almost all of the ticks were carrying tick-borne pathogens, dominantly with Rickettsia species. But still, no Rickettsia conori. We were looking for Rickettsia conori. 2022, because that was the most obvious thing we thought we would find. So in 2022, the same year we started, as I said, we tried tackling on many problems at once. So we had many obstacles and we were inexperienced, but when we saw a patient with a clinical manifestation, we also took samples from them so we can freeze them for a retrograde examination. So here we have patient with a dog that was treated for ehrlichiosis. She didn't have an eschar, she didn't have a tick bite, but she had maculopapular diffuse rash and fever. We put her on doxycycline, as we do. She got better, everything was okay. In comparison with the first case, for example, that had rickettsiosis suspected, and this was rickettsiosis suspecta. This patient had pretty much higher markers of inflammation. But this is relative for everything. And it's very different, if you have the diagnostic capacity, you can do it right now. You can have the diagnosis, and it's relieving the tension a clinician has, because a fever and a rash has a broad spectrum of differential diagnosis. If you take dermatology, it's a subdivision of the internal medicine. It probably is the hardest one if somebody wants to be a good dermatologist, because it has so many potential diagnoses. And if you take fever and rash as a subdivision of infectious diseases, it's the same problem. And especially when dealing with maculopapular rash, because it's not very specific rash. Next one. These two cases are just the most important, most interesting cases we've found that year. We were dealing with the study with ticks and humans, as I mentioned earlier. Not to be disappointed that our colleagues are not understanding the importance of the study and not sending the ticks for analysis. So I figured, what can we do in the meanwhile? Well, we have all these individuals that were infested with ticks. We can test for seroprevalence, lay the foundations for other diseases in North Macedonia, maybe shine some light. So we took, although a small sample size, we took almost 50 patients with a history of tick infestation. And we tested them for seroprevalence of antibodies to Borrelia burgdorferi and TBE virus. As I said, we have many encephalitis patients with unknown etiology. Although, as Professor Christova said, we are not in the TBE belt from Europe to Asia, we are still in the regions with risk, and there's always a possibility for imported encephalitis. Because we had a small sample size and strengthening our collaboration with the Pasteur Zavod in Serbia, we did a comparison between two neighboring countries. As expected, Serbia had higher Lyme borreliosis seropositivity. We didn't know what to expect because we don't have any data, but we found that we have seropositive patients for Lyme borreliosis, because this is not very accurate. The serological testing is not very accurate laboratory measure. We included control groups, so we did have a difference in the control group and the tested group. Regarding the TBE virus, we had only one patient that had moderate TBEV neutralizing reaction. This could on one side mean that there is a potential foci in North Macedonia, but my friend from Greece, Eleftherios, would say no, and he will make it in caps lock, because one positive test is 0 positive tests. But still, it encouraged us, because there is a small sample size, to do, for the next year, to do planning for something much bigger. Something like Bulgaria, for example. 2023. The first study I showed with tick human infestations. 400 consultations, 17 patients. Now we have 300 consultations, 112 by now. So we had to be persistent. The key thing is being persistent and not to give up. We don't have PCR detection still for 2023. We just finished the season. We gathered a lot of samples, but we managed to do, Pavle managed to do with his institute morphological analysis. And the results are interesting, because we have Hyeloma marginatum in 26%. So unfortunately, we can't compare this with earlier results, so we can track why is that happening, or was it always like this? But it's a warning sign. Warning sign. Yes, for what? For Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever. This year, a patient This year we had a patient with fever and rash again, and hemorrhagic syndrome. My colleagues called me from the clinical hospital in Stip. She had 3 days fever, and after 3 days after a tick bite, she developed fever and rash. The tick was present on the body only for 1 hour. The husband extracted it. So we weren't ready for this, because This is a clear demonstration that we weren't ready for this. This is a clear demonstration that the problem is obvious, that the tick-borne diseases are overlooked, because if you don't think about it, then you won't include it in the differential diagnosis when you're dealing with the patient. And when dealing with the patient, the most important thing in this modern time when a clinician deals with a patient is the differential diagnosis. Because if you find the diagnosis, then you can Google it for the treatment. But the doctor, the clinician, the most important part is differential diagnosis. So this patient, when was transferred to a clinic, worsened. His condition worsened very fast. She developed hemorrhagic syndrome. She was supportive therapy. We were treating her with blood derivatives. She was for 3 or 4 days before we suspected for Congo Crimean hemorrhagic fever. So all the medical personnel that was dealing with this patient, yes, they need to be protected, but people are slightly loose when they know that they don't have anything contagious. And on the last day, we tested, took samples, took them to the Institute of Public Health in Skopje. Luckily, they had tests. They tested for Congo Crimean, CCHF, and it was positive. The last case for CCHF in North Macedonia was 1976, small epidemic, intrafamilial. After we got the results of the test, the patient went into cardiac arrest and had a fatal outcome. But this was a big exclamation point, because now we had to think about the medical personnel. And unfortunately, one of our personnel had acquired the virus. She had an infection. She went into hemorrhagic phase, but we treated her with ribavirin. We don't know if she got better because of the ribavirin or not, or just spontaneous, but she got better luckily, and she survived, and everything is okay with her. But interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, another patient with CCHF was hospitalized at our clinic from a different region, no epidemiological link. Suspicion for CCHF arose. We tested positive. He was okay, but again, what does this mean? Yes, it can mean that there is a potential outbreak if we take even the results from the tick analysis, but it is more importantly, it's increased awareness among medical professionals, because they started thinking about this, the diagnosis, and started testing about this. And I will show you some of the patients we documented throughout this year, because the results from our last year managed to inspire, as I was inspired by my colleagues from Serbia and France. I managed to inspire some of my colleagues, develop a team in the clinic so we can start even more aggressively, start documenting patients, start taking samples, start doing some real work. So we documented several spotted fever cases after a tick bite. This is clearly NSF, but I hope that will prove Rickettsia conuri in 2024. This is another case of spotted fever. Generalized maculopapular rash, and we were lucky enough that it sounds bad, but he didn't notice the tick, so we could take a good picture of the tick. He didn't consult any surgeons to throw the tick away. This is a patient I treated 2 weeks ago. We finished the treatment, It was like my first lady I described, very cool patient. He took pictures of his, he didn't know before consultation with me, but he took pictures for everything. Then I took the other pictures. I had to convince my professor for tropical diseases that this is not anthrax, because he took all the books from Yugoslavia, and in every other book, literally it's the same description: black center, white halo, and red halo around it. Even when I showed him the picture with the tick, he didn't believe me. But we managed to detect Ebola. 2 patients. This one patient, the S hair is almost gone, but 2 or 3 patients with Ebola. And we have Lyme, yes, but still I will be satisfied when we have direct confirmation. But we have not 1, not 2, but many cases of Lyme borreliosis, because we had to bother all the regional clinics to send the patients to us. And we finally made a conclusion that we have Lyme borreliosis in Macedonia. Even we had 1 patient on the right, these are 2 separate patients on the right with neuroborreliosis, but I didn't want to do a lumbar puncture because the patient was getting better. He was nice, he had only facial paresis, but next time. So further aspirations, we are just, as we started, everything is pairing the work. The work is getting bigger and bigger. The results are very are a big encouragement for us and a big stimulation and inspiration to continue. This symposium is very important for us because we want to spread what we achieved with collaborating with our partners. We want to spread the message to the other countries and to Serbia, again, what we can do if we work together and we shift our focus on tick-borne diseases, and why is it important to include them in the differential diagnosis when dealing with a patient. Thank you.